My name is Reverend Thomas Whitmore, and I have carried this burden for nigh on 40 years.
If you love powerful stories full of twists, deep emotions, and unforgettable characters, subscribe now and turn on the bell.
What I am about to tell you happened in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in the year of our Lord 1692, when I was but a young minister fresh from Harvard College. The events I witnessed changed not only my understanding of justice and mercy, but the very course of our colonial history. I pray that in setting down these words, I might find some measure of peace for my troubled soul. It was the autumn of 1692 when she first came to our village of Millbrook, a settlement some 20 miles inland from Boston. The witch trials in Salem had cast a shadow over all of Massachusetts, and fear hung in the air like morning mist over the Concord River. Elizabeth Hartwell arrived on a merchant's wagon, claiming to be a widow seeking refuge with distant relations. She was perhaps 25 years of age, with auburn hair that caught the light like burnished copper, and eyes the color of deep forest pools. There was something about her bearing that spoke of gentle breeding, though her simple gray dress and worn traveling cloak suggested modest circumstances. The widow Hartwell, as she came to be known, took lodgings with goodwife Margaret Thornton, an elderly woman whose own husband had perished in King Philip's War some years prior. It was a practical arrangement. Elizabeth could help with the household duties in exchange for room and board, and Margaret welcomed the company in her declining years. From my first meeting with Elizabeth at Sunday service, I sensed there was more to her story than she revealed. When I offered the usual pastoral counsel to newcomers, asking about her previous congregation and the circumstances of her husband's death, she answered with careful words that revealed little while seeming to say much. My husband died in service. To the crown, she would say, her voice soft but steady. I find it painful to speak of such matters, Reverend Whitmore. I hope you will understand. Indeed, I did understand grief, having lost my own parents to fever the previous winter. Yet something in her manner suggested not merely sorrow, but secrets carefully guarded. She attended service faithfully, sang the psalms with a voice like silver bells, and comported herself with quiet dignity. The other women of the village initially regarded her with the suspicion typically reserved for strangers, but her gentle ways and willingness to assist the sick and poor soon won their acceptance. It was in the spring of 1693 that I first noticed the changes in Elizabeth's appearance. As the preacher, I was accustomed to observing my flock, watching for signs of spiritual or physical distress that might require pastoral attention. Elizabeth had taken to wearing her cloak even on warm days, and her face had acquired a fuller, softer appearance. When she began declining invitations to community gatherings, claiming fatigue or minor ailments, my suspicions began to crystallize into unwelcome certainty. The situation came to a head on a humid June evening when goodwife Thornton appeared at my door in great distress. Reverend Whitmore, she whispered, glancing about as if the very walls might have ears. I fear I have harbored sin under my roof. The widow Hartwell, she is with child, though she claims to be a widow of 2 years' standing. My heart sank, for I had suspected as much. In our Puritan community, such circumstances demanded immediate action. An unmarried woman carrying a child was not merely a personal failing, but a corruption that threatened the moral fabric of our entire settlement. The laws were clear and unforgiving. Are you certain of this, goodwife Thornton? I asked, though I already knew the answer. As certain as I am of my own name, Reverend. She thinks I have not noticed, but these old eyes have seen many women in such condition. What are we to do? The magistrates, they will demand to know the father's name. And if she refuses to tell, she did not need to finish. We both knew the punishment for fornication could be severe, public whipping, imprisonment, or worse if adultery was suspected. I spent that sleepless night in prayer, seeking divine guidance. Elizabeth Hartwell had been nothing but virtuous in her conduct since arriving in our village. She had tended the sick, comforted the bereaved, and shown Christian charity to all. Yet the evidence of her condition could not be denied, and our laws made no allowance for circumstances or character when it came to such matters. The next morning, I requested that Elizabeth attend me at the meeting house. She arrived wearing her heaviest cloak despite the warm weather, her face pale but composed. I had rehearsed my words carefully, intending to approach the matter with as much gentleness as possible, while still fulfilling my duties as a minister of God. "Sister Hartwell," I began, "it has come to my attention that you may be, that is to say, that your circumstances may have changed since your arrival among us." Her green eyes met mine steadily, and I saw in them not shame or defiance, but a deep, abiding sadness that touched my very soul. "Reverend Whitmore," she said quietly, "I have prayed daily that this cup might pass from me, but I see now that the Lord has other plans. Yes, I am with child. I expect to be delivered sometime in the early autumn. Then we must discuss the matter of the father," I said as gently as I could manage. "The magistrates will require his name, and arrangements must be made for your marriage or other considerations." At this, something changed in her demeanor. The sadness in her eyes was joined by what I could only describe as fear. Not the fear of earthly punishment, but something deeper and more profound. "I cannot name the father, Reverend. I will not name him. My dear sister, you must understand the gravity of your situation. The laws regarding fornication are severe, and without the father's acknowledgement and marriage, you face public discipline, fines, and possibly imprisonment. If you will but tell me his name, perhaps we can arrange matters privately, with minimal scandal to yourself or the community." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her folded hands. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "The father he is beyond the reach of colonial law, Reverend Whitmore. He is a man of such station that to name him would bring not justice, but destruction upon us all. I would rather face whatever punishment awaits me than speak his name." This declaration puzzled me greatly. What man could be so highly placed as to be beyond the reach of Massachusetts law? Even the colonial governor was subject to oversight from London, and the wealthiest merchants were still bound by the same moral codes as common citizens. Yet something in Elizabeth's manner convinced me that she spoke truth, however mysterious that truth might be. "Elizabeth," I said, abandoning formal address in my concern for her welfare, "I have observed your conduct since your arrival, and I know you to be a woman of virtue and faith. Whatever circumstances led to your current situation, I believe you to be more victim than villain. But I cannot protect you from the law, and if you will not name the father, the magistrates will assume the worst." Tears began to flow down her cheeks, and she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. "You are kind, Reverend, kinder than I deserve. But there are powers at work here greater than colonial justice. The father of my child. He is—" She struggled with the words, then seemed to reach some internal decision. "He is the king himself, Charles II, by the grace of God, King of England, Scotland, France, and Ireland." I confess that my first reaction was to assume the poor woman had been driven to madness by her circumstances. King Charles II had died nearly a decade prior, in 1685, and even when alive, he had never set foot on American soil. Yet, as I looked into Elizabeth's eyes, I saw not the wild look of lunacy, but the steady gaze of someone speaking a profound and dangerous truth. "Elizabeth, surely you cannot mean—" "I was lady-in-waiting to one of his mistresses," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Louise de Querouaille, the Duchess of Portsmouth. This was in 1691, shortly before I departed for America. The king, he took notice of me during a court function. I was young, alone, and far from my family in Devon. When the King of England expresses interest in a woman, Reverend, she has little choice in the matter. The pieces began to fall into place with terrible clarity. King Charles II had been notorious for his numerous mistresses and illegitimate children. If Elizabeth spoke truth, then the child she carried was of royal blood, bastard though it might be. But the king died in 1685, I said, still struggling to comprehend her words. "That was King Charles II, she replied. "I speak of his successor, though he has never been formally crowned as such. The man who would be Charles III has been, shall we say, maintaining certain family traditions regarding court ladies. This was treasonous talk of the highest order. The succession had been in turmoil since the glorious revolution of 1688. when William of Orange had taken the throne with his wife Mary. If Elizabeth spoke of a claimant to the throne living in exile, then her situation was far more dangerous than simple fornication. Elizabeth, do you understand what you are telling me?
If word of this were to reach the wrong ears, you could be charged with treason, and as your confessor, I could be implicated as well. She nodded gravely. Why do you think I came to this remote village, Reverend? Why do you think I have
guarded my secret so carefully? But now the child will make the truth manifest, and I fear what consequences may follow. Over the following days, I wrestled with my conscience and my duty. As a minister of God, I was bound to uphold the moral laws of our community. As a loyal subject of King William, I was obligated to report any treasonous activity. Yet as a Christian man, I could not bring myself to deliver this troubled woman to what would surely be a terrible fate. I began to make discreet inquiries, carefully and without revealing my reasons. Through correspondence with fellow ministers in Boston and even London, I learned that there had indeed been whispers at court regarding a young woman who had disappeared from the household of the Duchess of Portsmouth. Moreover, there were rumors that certain Jacobite sympathizers had been spiriting away potential embarrassments to the royal succession, sending them to the American colonies where they might disappear entirely. As Elizabeth's condition became more apparent, the village began to take notice. Goodwife Thornton, bless her soul, had maintained her silence, but such things cannot be hidden indefinitely. The other women began to whisper, and soon the men were asking pointed questions. By July, the situation could no longer be ignored. It was Magistrate Cornelius Blackwood who finally brought the matter to official attention. Blackwood was a stern man in his 50s, recently arrived from England with a commission to root out moral corruption in the colony. He had made his reputation in Boston by prosecuting several high-profile cases of adultery and fornication, and he approached his duties with the zeal of an Old Testament prophet. "Reverend Whitmore," he said when he called upon me one sweltering afternoon, "I understand you have been counseling the woman Elizabeth Hartwell regarding her condition. I have spoken with her, yes, as is my pastoral duty. And has she revealed the name of the man responsible for her current state?" I chose my words carefully. "She has indicated that the circumstances are complicated, Magistrate Blackwood. The man in question is not available for questioning or marriage." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Dead, you mean?" "Not exactly." "Then where is he, Reverend? In another colony? Returned to England? A man cannot simply disappear when he has responsibilities to face." I found myself in an impossible position. To reveal Elizabeth's secret would likely result in her death as a traitor. To continue concealing it would make me complicit in what Blackwood would surely see as obstruction of justice. "Perhaps you should speak with Mistress Hartwell directly," I suggested. "I am bound by the seal of pastoral confidence in certain matters." Blackwood snorted. "Pastoral confidence does not extend to criminal matters, Reverend. But very well, I shall question the woman myself. See that she is available tomorrow morning at the meeting house." That evening, I met with Elizabeth in the privacy of the church. Her pregnancy was now unmistakable, and she moved with the careful gait of a woman in her 7th month. "The magistrate will question you tomorrow," I told her. "Elizabeth, I have tried to protect you, but I fear my abilities in that regard are limited. If you continue to refuse to name the father, Blackwood will assume the worst. He may even suspect adultery, which carries the penalty of death." She placed her hands protectively over her swollen belly. "What would you have me do, Reverend? Speak the truth and be hanged as a traitor? Or invent some lie that will destroy an innocent man? Perhaps there is a third option. You could claim that you were forced, that you do not know the man's name. It would still be fornication, but the penalty would be less severe." Elizabeth shook her head firmly. "I will not add perjury to my sins. What happened between the king and myself was not force, Reverend, though neither was it entirely by my own choice. The truth is more complex than our laws allow for." The next morning dawned clear and hot, with the kind of oppressive humidity that makes even breathing feel laborious. The entire village seemed to hold its breath as Elizabeth made her way to the meeting house, flanked by Goodwife Thornton and myself. Magistrate Blackwood had arranged for the session to be conducted with only the necessary officials present, but word had spread, and curious faces peered from windows and doorways as we passed. Inside the meeting house, Blackwood sat behind a simple wooden table, flanked by two other magistrates who had ridden over from the county seat. Elizabeth stood before them with quiet dignity, her hands folded and her chin raised despite her circumstances. "State your name for the record," Blackwood commanded. "Elizabeth Hartwell, and your condition is apparent to all present. Are you married, Mistress Hartwell?" "I am a widow, sir." "And when did your husband die?" "In the year 1690, sir." "Then the child you carry was conceived in adultery or fornication. Who is the father?" Elizabeth was silent for a long moment, and I could see the struggle playing out in her expression. Finally, she lifted her chin higher and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "I cannot name him, sir. He is beyond your jurisdiction." Blackwood's face darkened. "No man is beyond the reach of colonial justice, woman. Is he in another colony, another country?" "He is." "Yes, sir, in another country." "Then we shall write to the authorities there. What is his name?" Again, silence. I found myself holding my breath, knowing that Elizabeth stood at a crossroads that would determine not only her fate, but potentially the fate of nations. "I will not speak his name," she said finally. The magistrate's patience snapped. "You will speak his name, or you will face the full penalty of the law for your obstinacy. Do you understand that concealing such information is itself a crime?" "I understand, sir." "Very well. By your own admission, you are guilty of fornication. By your refusal to name your partner, you compound that guilt with obstruction of justice. I sentence you to 20 lashes to be administered publicly, followed by 6 months' imprisonment. Furthermore, when the child is born, it shall be bound out as an indentured servant until the age of 21, as befits a bastard with no father to claim it." Elizabeth swayed slightly at this pronouncement, and I stepped forward to steady her. The sentence was severe but not unusual for such cases. What troubled me most was the magistrate's decision regarding the child. If Elizabeth spoke truth about its royal parentage, then we were condemning a potential heir to the throne to a life of servitude. "There is one way to avoid this sentence," Blackwood continued, his voice taking on a somewhat gentler tone. "If you will but name the father, arrangements can be made. Even if he is in England, word can be sent. Marriage by proxy is possible in certain circumstances." Elizabeth's response was barely audible. "He is already married, sir. Most thoroughly." Married. This admission seemed to satisfy Blackwood that adultery was indeed involved, and his expression hardened once more. "Then your sentence stands. The punishment shall be carried out in 3 days' time, allowing you to prepare your soul for what is to come." As we left the meeting house, Elizabeth stumbled, and I feared she might collapse from the strain. Goodwife and Thornton and I managed to get her back to her lodgings, where she took to her bed and wept for the first time since I had known her. "Reverend," she whispered when her tears had subsided, "there is something you must know, something I have not told you." I sat beside her bed, preparing myself for yet another revelation. "The child I carry, it moves strangely, not as other children move in the womb. I fear there may be something wrong with it, something that will make its parentage even more apparent when it is born." "What do you mean?" "The royal line. There are certain marks, certain signs that appear in the blood. A birthmark shaped like a crown, always in the same place on the right shoulder. If this child bears that mark," the implication struck me like a physical blow. "If the child was born with the royal birthmark, there would be no concealing its true parentage. Word would spread, investigations would follow, and Elizabeth would surely face execution for treason." "Elizabeth, we must find a way to prevent this. Perhaps we could arrange for you to give birth in secret, away from the village. The child could be taken somewhere safe, and you could claim it was stillborn." She shook her head weakly. "Where would we take a royal bastard, Reverend? And what kind of life would await such a child, hidden away from the world? No, I have made my peace with whatever fate awaits us both." The 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. I spent my time in prayer and contemplation, seeking divine guidance that seemed frustratingly absent. The village buzzed with anticipation and speculation, for public punishments were rare in our small community and drew spectators from miles around. On the appointed day, a scaffold had been erected in the village square. Elizabeth emerged from her lodgings supported by Goodwife Thornton, her face pale but composed. She had dressed in her finest gown, a dark blue woolen dress that she had likely worn at court years before. Even in her advanced pregnancy and dire circumstances, there was something regal about her bearing that made the watching crowd fall silent. Magistrate Blackwood read the charges and sentence in a booming voice that carried across the square. As the constable prepared to administer the punishment, Elizabeth turned to me with eyes that held no fear, only a deep sadness. "Reverend," she said softly, "if I do not survive this day, promise me you will see that my child is baptized with the name I have chosen. Of course. What name? Charles James Hartwell. Charles for his father, James for the Stuart line, and Hartwell to honor the man I claimed as husband, though he never existed." The whipping that followed was brutal to witness. Elizabeth bore it with a stoicism that amazed the crowd, making no sound beyond a sharp intake of breath with each lash. By the 10th stroke, blood had begun to seep through her dress, and I feared for both her life and that of her unborn child. Yet she remained standing, her hands pressed protectively over her belly. It was after the 15th stroke that disaster struck. Elizabeth suddenly cried out, not in pain from the lash, but in the unmistakable agony of labor. The shock and trauma had brought on her confinement nearly 2 months early. "Stop!" I shouted, pushing forward through the crowd. "The woman is in childbed." Blackwood hesitated, his face torn between duty and humanity. The crowd murmured restlessly, for even in our stern Puritan community, there were limits to what civilized people would tolerate. "The sentence must be completed," Blackwood declared, but his voice lacked conviction. "Would you have the blood of mother and child on your hands?" I demanded. "This woman needs immediate medical attention, not further punishment." Elizabeth collapsed to her knees, her waters breaking in a rush that stained the wooden platform. The crowd gasped, and several women pushed forward to assist her. Even Blackwood could not ignore the urgency of the situation. "Very well," he said tersely. "The remainder of the sentence is suspended until after the birth. Remove her from my sight." We carried Elizabeth to Goodwife Thornton's house, where several of the village women had already begun preparing for an emergency delivery. The local midwife, Goody Peters, took charge with practiced efficiency, though she shook her head ominously at Elizabeth's condition. "She's lost much blood from the whipping," she whispered to me, "and the child comes too early. I fear for them both." What followed was the longest night of my life. Elizabeth labored in agony, weakened by her ordeal and fighting to bring forth a child that seemed determined to enter the world despite the circumstances of its conception. I waited in the main room with Goodwife Thornton, listening to the sounds from the birthing chamber and praying as I had never prayed before. It was near dawn when we heard the thin wail of a newborn child. Goody Peters emerged from the chamber, her face grim but not without hope. "The child lives," she announced. "A boy, small but strong. As for the mother," she shook her head, "she is very weak. The next few hours will tell." I entered the birthing chamber to find Elizabeth propped up against pillows, her face ghostly pale but her eyes bright with maternal love as she gazed at the tiny bundle in her arms. The baby was indeed small, no doubt premature, but he appeared healthy and vigorous. "He's beautiful," I said softly, and meant it. The child had his mother's auburn hair and what appeared to be his father's strong jaw, even in miniature. "Look," Elizabeth whispered, and carefully turned the baby so I could see his right shoulder. There, dark against the pale skin, was a birthmark shaped unmistakably like a crown. My heart sank as I realized the full implications. There could now be no doubt about the child's parentage, and no hope of concealing his true identity. If anyone else saw that mark, "We must keep this secret," I said urgently. "That mark must never be seen by others." Elizabeth nodded weakly. I have thought of little else these past hours. Reverend, I fear I am dying. The bleeding will not stop, and I grow weaker by the hour. Promise me you will protect my son. Elizabeth, you must not speak of dying. You are young and strong. Promise me, she interrupted with what little strength she had left. Take him away from here. Give him a chance at life, even if it cannot be the life his birth would suggest. Tears streamed down my face as I took her hand. I promise. But Elizabeth, surely there is some hope. Listen to me carefully, she whispered, her voice growing fainter. In my traveling bag there is a letter sealed with red wax. It is written in the king's own hand, acknowledging the child and providing for his future. There is also a locket with the royal arms. These must be kept safe for the boy when he comes of age. I found the item she described, hidden in the false bottom of her traveling bag. The letter was indeed sealed with what appeared to be a royal seal, and the locket was clearly of precious metal and fine workmanship. What of Magistrate Blackwood? I asked. He will expect to complete your sentence, and he will want to see the child bound out as ordered. Elizabeth's breathing was becoming labored, and I had to lean close to hear her words. Tell him the child was born dead. Show him a stillborn infant from another birth. Goody Peters will know how to arrange such things. Let Elizabeth Hartwell and her bastard child disappear from the records forever. She lived for 2 more hours, long enough to nurse her son once and whisper a mother's blessing over his tiny head. As the sun rose over the Massachusetts countryside, Elizabeth Hartwell breathed her last, taking with her the secret of royal blood spilled on colonial soil. Goody Peters, bless her soul, proved equal to the deception we required. She had indeed assisted at another birth the previous week, where the child had been stillborn. The tiny body had been preserved pending burial, and it now served to convince Magistrate Blackwood that Elizabeth's son had not survived the trauma of premature birth. A mercy, perhaps, Blackwood observed coldly when shown the small corpse. Better that bastard spawn should not live to corrupt our community further. The real child, meanwhile, was hidden away with a wet nurse in a neighboring town, a woman who asked no questions and was well compensated for her silence. I told her that the boy was the orphaned son of distant relatives, and she accepted this explanation without inquiry. Elizabeth was buried in the common cemetery with little ceremony, her grave marked only with her assumed name and the date of her death. Magistrate Blackwood declared the matter closed and departed for Boston, no doubt to seek out other moral corruptions to prosecute. But the story was far from over. As young Charles James grew, it became clear that he had inherited more than just his father's royal blood. He possessed an intelligence and natural dignity that set him apart from other children, and the crown-shaped birthmark on his shoulder served as a constant reminder of his true identity. He arranged for his upbringing with a respectable farming family in Connecticut, far from Massachusetts and the scene of his mother's disgrace. The goodman and goodwife Harrison were told that the boy was the son of a deceased minister, and they raised him with appropriate education and Christian values. I visited regularly under the pretense of pastoral duties, monitoring his development and ensuring his secret remained safe. As the years passed, the political situation in England continued to evolve. King William died in 1702, followed by Queen Mary's sister Anne. The question of succession remained contentious, with various factions supporting different claimants to the throne. Had Elizabeth's son been legitimate, he might have had a stronger claim than many who actively sought the crown. When Charles James reached his majority, I finally revealed to him the truth of his parentage. I showed him his mother's letter and the royal locket, explaining the circumstances of his birth and the sacrifice his mother had made to protect him. His response was both more mature and more complex than I had anticipated. So I am the bastard son of a pretender king, he said thoughtfully. Neither fully royal nor fully common, neither English nor fully American. What am I to do with such knowledge, Reverend Whitmore? That, my boy, is for you to decide. Your mother died believing that you were destined for something greater than the circumstances of your birth might suggest. Whether that greatness lies in claiming your heritage or in transcending it entirely is yours to determine. Charles James chose to remain in America, though he did travel once to England to learn more about his parents and his potential inheritance. He returned with stories of a court still divided by faction and intrigue, where his royal blood would have made him more target than treasure. Instead, he married a merchant's daughter in Philadelphia, raised a family, and became a successful trader in his own right. He never publicly claimed his royal heritage, but neither did he forget it. During the troubles that led to our revolution against the crown, he found himself in the peculiar position of being both a subject rebelling against his sovereign and a bastard son taking arms against his father's house. The irony was not lost on him, and he often remarked that perhaps this had been his destiny all along, to help birth a nation where accidents of birth mattered less than character and achievement. The birthmark remained visible throughout his life, a secret sign of royal blood flowing through the veins of an American patriot. When he died in 1756, he took the secret to his grave, though he had shared it with his eldest son, who in turn passed it down through the generations. I am now an old man, and my days on this earth grow short. I have kept Elizabeth's secret for 40 years, but I find myself compelled to set down this record before I join her in whatever realm awaits us beyond this life. Perhaps it is vanity that drives me to ensure this story survives, or perhaps it is a sense of historical duty. The child born of that tragic union between royal pretender and colonial maiden grew to help shape the very nation that would eventually cast off the yoke of kingship entirely. There is a poetry in it, I think, that the blood of English kings should flow anonymously through American veins, hidden and humble, contributing to the strength of a republic rather than the pageantry of a monarchy. Elizabeth Hartwell was punished for giving birth in secret to the child of a king, but in that punishment lay the seeds of something greater than either she or her royal lover could have imagined. Sometimes on quiet Sunday mornings when I prepare my sermons, I think about the choices we make and the consequences that flow from them like ripples on a pond. Elizabeth chose love over prudence, truth over convenience, sacrifice over self-preservation. Her son chose obscurity over glory, service over dominion, the uncertain promise of a new world over the faded grandeur of an old one. And perhaps that is the real lesson of this tale, that in a land where men and women can make themselves anew, the circumstances of birth need not determine the shape of destiny. Elizabeth's child bore the mark of kings, but chose the path of citizens. In doing so, he honored both his mother's sacrifice and his father's blood, while transcending the limitations that either might have imposed. The crown-shaped birthmark faded with time, as such marks often do, but the character it represented, the nobility that comes not from accidents of birth but from choices deliberately made, that endured and grew stronger with each passing year. In the end, perhaps that is the only royalty that truly matters, the sovereignty we claim over our own souls, and the kingdoms we build through love, sacrifice, and faith in something greater than ourselves. As I close this account, I offer a prayer for Elizabeth Hartwell and her son, for the choices they made and the prices they paid. May they find in the next world the peace and recognition that eluded them in this one. And may God forgive us all for the judgments we render and the secrets we keep, knowing that in His sight all souls are equal, whether born in palaces or mangers, whether marked by crowns or scars. The story ends, but the bloodline continues, flowing quietly through American families who will never know the royal heritage hidden in their veins. It is perhaps exactly as it should be in this new world we are building, a place where a king's son can become a common man, and common men can rise to greatness without need of crowns or birthright. Thus concludes the true account of Elizabeth Hartwell and the secret she died to protect. May it serve as testament to the power of love and sacrifice, and to the mysterious ways in which Providence shapes the destinies of nations and individuals alike.
If this story touched you, don't leave without subscribing. Every week, a new, intense, and unexpected tale awaits you here on Tales of the Forgotten Heart.